When Mia Carter, a struggling single mom, finds a lost little boy outside her bakery on a stormy night, she does what any good person would. She takes him in, feeds him, and keeps him safe. But just as she starts to gain his trust, her world is turned upside down. The police show up at her door, and with them comes a furious billionaire claiming she kidnapped his son. But if that's true, why is the boy too afraid to go back? As tensions rise and secrets unravel, Mia finds herself caught in a battle not just for the boy's safety, but for the kind of love and family neither of them ever expected. Mia Carter had always loved the way rain smelled, fresh, clean, like the world was starting over. But tonight, as the thunder rumbled low in the sky and the streetlights flickered under the relentless downpour, she didn't have time to think about that. She was in a hurry, gripping her umbrella tightly as she locked up Lily's Sweet Treats, her small-town bakery. The warm glow of the shop's interior faded behind her, leaving her alone on the deserted sidewalk. She glanced at her watch. 9:37 p.m. Too late to be out, especially with the storm rolling in. Her 6-year-old daughter, Lily, was already home, with their elderly neighbor, Mrs. Jensen, and Mia was eager to get back. That was when she saw him, a small figure barely visible in the shadows of the alley next to the bakery. At first, Mia thought it was a stray dog, just a bundle of something small and shivering against the brick wall. But then lightning illuminated the street, and her heart stopped. It was a child, a little boy, no older than 5 or 6, huddled in a too-thin hoodie, his dark hair plastered to his forehead from the rain. His small arms were wrapped around his knees, his entire body trembling. His sneakers, now soaked, looked expensive, the kind she'd never be able to afford for Lily. Mia's stomach tightened. This was not normal. A kid, alone in the rain at this hour. She took a step forward, crouching down to his level. "Hey, sweetheart," she said, keeping her voice soft so she wouldn't scare him. "Are you lost?" The boy flinched, shrinking further into himself. His blue eyes, wide with fear, darted to her, then away. Mia hesitated. The last thing she wanted was to make him bolt into the street. She let the rain drip from her umbrella as she tried again. "It's okay. I won't hurt you. My name's Mia. I own that bakery right there." She pointed behind her. "You look cold. Do you want to come inside for a minute?" The boy didn't speak, but his lips were quivering. His hands, small and pale, clutched at his knees as if holding himself together. Mia bit her lip. The responsible thing to do would be to call the police immediately, but something about the way he looked at her, half terrified, half desperate, made her hesitate. "You're not in trouble," she promised. "I just want to help. What's your name?" The boy hesitated. Then, in a whisper so soft she almost didn't hear it, he said, "Oliver." Mia's heart squeezed. "That's a nice name. Oliver, do you know where your parents are?" The fear in his eyes deepened. He gave the smallest shake of his head. Mia inhaled slowly, trying to stay calm. "Okay," she said gently. "Why don't we go inside and warm up a little? I have hot chocolate." At the mention of hot chocolate, Oliver's gaze flickered, the tiniest spark of interest breaking through the fear. His little hands flexed like he wanted to reach for the offer, but wasn't sure if he should. Mia took the chance. Moving slowly, she extended her hand. "You don't have to say anything else right now. Just let me help." For a long, agonizing moment, Oliver didn't move. Then, hesitantly, he reached out and took her hand. His skin was ice cold. Mia's chest ached. No child should be this cold, this scared, this alone. Carefully, she led him inside the bakery. The warm air wrapped around them instantly, and Oliver let out a tiny, involuntary sigh as the heat touched his damp skin. Mia quickly grabbed a towel from the back and wrapped it around his small shoulders. "Better?" she asked. Oliver gave the barest nod. "Okay," Mia said, moving behind the counter. "One hot chocolate coming up." She worked quickly, frothing the milk and adding just the right amount of cocoa and sugar. As she moved, she kept an eye on him. He hadn't run, which was good, but he was still tense, his little fingers clutching the towel like it was the only thing keeping him from disappearing. She set the steaming mug in front of him, along with a plate of cookies. "Here you go." Oliver hesitated, then wrapped his tiny hands around the cup, bringing it to his lips. The moment the warmth hit him, his shoulders relaxed just a little. Mia sat across from him, giving him space. "Do you live around here, Oliver?" Shook his head. She frowned. "Did you get lost?" This time, he hesitated before nodding. But Mia had a feeling there was more to it. "Does your family know you're missing?" she asked gently. A shadow crossed his face. He looked down at the hot chocolate and didn't answer. Mia's stomach churned. Something wasn't right. She could call the police right now, but the fear in Oliver's eyes made her hesitate. What if he was running from something bad? What if he was afraid of whoever was supposed to take care of him? She needed to know more, but first, he needed to feel safe. "Tell you what," she said. "I have a little girl about your age. Her name is Lily. She's at home with our neighbor, but she'd love to meet you." Oliver's eyes lifted, curious despite himself. "She's nice," Mia continued, "and she'd definitely want to share her toys. Maybe after you warm up, we can go to my house and you can meet her. Would that be okay?" For the first time, Oliver looked uncertain instead of just scared, but he nodded. Mia smiled. "Okay, buddy. One step at a time." She got up and grabbed her phone, intending to call the police in private while Oliver finished his drink. But then she glanced back at him, small, drenched, shivering despite the heat, and something in her heart clenched. She didn't know what had happened to him. She didn't know if he had a family looking for him or if he had run from something far worse. But she knew one thing for sure. Tonight, he wasn't going to be alone. Mia Carter didn't sleep that night. She had tucked Oliver into the small pull-out bed in Lily's room, covering him with the thickest blankets she could find. He had barely spoken after finishing his hot chocolate, offering only small nods and hesitant glances as she led him up the stairs to her modest two-bedroom home. Lily had been over the moon when she saw him. "Who's that?" she had asked, peeking over her stuffed bunny. "This is Oliver," Mia had said gently. "He's staying with us tonight." Lily had smiled in that way only 6-year-olds could, bright and full of unshakable trust. "Hi, Oliver. You can sleep in my room. I have dinosaurs and a nightlight, so it's not scary." Oliver hadn't responded, just clutched the fresh pair of pajamas Mia had given him, a pair that used to belong to Lily when she was younger. He had changed quickly in the bathroom, and when he returned, he hesitated before climbing onto the bed, curling himself into the smallest space possible. Lily had whispered a good night, her little hand patting his shoulder before she rolled over in her own bed. Within minutes she was out, breathing softly. Oliver, though, had stayed awake, staring at the ceiling. Mia had sat on the edge of his bed. "Do you want me to leave the door open?" A small nod. She left it open and turned off the lights. "I'm just down the hall, okay? You're safe here." For a long time he said nothing. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he murmured, "Thank you." Mia's heart squeezed. "You're welcome, sweetheart. Sleep well." She had waited until his breathing slowed until he was deep in sleep before retreating to her own room. But sleep never found her. Instead, she lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about the little boy now curled up under her roof. Who was he? Why had he run? And why did he look so terrified every time she mentioned calling someone? Mia had never been the kind of person who ignored her instincts, and right now, every instinct was screaming that there was something wrong. She would call the police in the morning. She had to. It was the responsible thing to do. But something deep in her gut told her that Oliver wasn't just a lost child. He was a scared one, and scared children didn't run unless they had a reason. Mia woke to the smell of pancakes. She blinked, rubbing sleep from her eyes. It took her a second to remember everything. The storm, the little boy, the way his tiny fingers had clutched the mug of hot chocolate like it was his last lifeline. She sat up. From down the hall she could hear Lily talking excitedly. The warmth of her voice, the happy babble, made Mia relax. At least Oliver wasn't afraid of her. Pulling on a hoodie, she padded into the kitchen. Oliver was sitting at the small wooden table, his legs swinging slightly. He was wearing the soft sweatpants and t-shirt Mia had given him the night before. His hair, though still slightly damp from his bath, was curling slightly at the ends. In front of him, Lily was piling pancakes onto a plate. her face scrunched up in concentration. Mia smiled. "Well, good morning." Oliver stiffened. Not much, but enough for her to notice. Lily beamed. "I made pancakes for Oliver. He's never had dinosaur pancakes before." Mia raised an eyebrow. "Is that right?" Oliver hesitated, then nodded. Mia softened. "Well then, you're in for a treat. Lily makes the best dinosaur pancakes in town." Lily gasped. "Mom, that's a lie. You make the best ones." "I just poured the mix." Oliver glanced between them, as if unsure whether this was a conversation he could join. Mia kept her tone light. "Well, how about we let Oliver be the judge?" Oliver hesitated, then took a small bite. The moment the warm pancake hit his tongue, his shoulders relaxed. He didn't say anything, but he took another bite. Then another. Mia watched as he ate, his tiny hands gripping the fork, his expression unreadable. She didn't want to push, not yet. "Do you like syrup?" she asked. Oliver gave a small nod. Lily immediately grabbed the syrup bottle, pouring way too much on his plate. Oliver blinked at the puddle of syrup. Then just barely. A tiny smile flickered across his face. Mia felt something in her chest ache. It was the first time she had seen him smile. After breakfast, Lily dragged Oliver into the living room, showing him all her toys. Mia used the moment of distraction to slip into the kitchen and grab her phone. She hesitated. She knew she had to do it. Call the police, report him as found. But every time she looked at him, small, unsure, clutching a stuffed dinosaur Lily had pressed into his hands, she hesitated. Something wasn't right. She needed more information first. Sliding her phone into her pocket, she took a deep breath and walked back into the living room. "Hey, Oliver," she asked gently. He looked up at her. She crouched so she was at his eye level. "I was wondering, do you remember where you live?" Oliver's hands tightened on the dinosaur. His lip trembled. Lily, oblivious, kept stacking blocks. Mia softened, her voice. "It's okay if you don't want to tell me, but I just want to make sure your family knows you're safe." Oliver swallowed hard. His small fingers curled into his shirt. "I don't want to go back," he whispered. Mia's heart stuttered. Lily finally looked up, blinking. "Why not?" Oliver's gaze darted toward her. He hesitated. Then, quietly, "They don't listen." Mia inhaled slowly. "Who doesn't listen, sweetheart?" Oliver looked down at his lap. Mia didn't press. Instead, she gently reached for his hand. "I'm not going to make you go anywhere you don't want to, but I do need to know if there's someone looking for you, someone who loves you." Oliver hesitated. Then, in a voice so soft she almost didn't hear it, he whispered, "He's always busy." Mia frowned. "Who?" Oliver's grip on the stuffed dinosaur tightened. "My dad." Mia's heart clenched. "Does your dad know you're missing?" Oliver shook his head. His little shoulders trembled. For the first time since she had found him, his voice cracked. "He won't even notice." Mia felt a sharp pain in her chest. She knew then that this was more than just a lost child. Oliver hadn't wandered off. He had run away, and suddenly, calling the police felt a lot more complicated. Mia Carter had spent the last 6 years navigating single motherhood with careful steps, always making the best decisions for her daughter, Lily. But now, as she stood in her tiny kitchen, staring at the little boy who had just confessed to running away from a father who wouldn't notice he was gone, she felt completely out of her depth. Oliver Lancaster. That name wasn't familiar to her. But something about him, the way he flinched at loud noises, the way he hesitated before speaking as if weighing every word, told her there was more to his story than a simple case of a child getting lost. She had to do something, and she had to do it soon. The morning passed in a quiet, tentative kind of peace. Oliver stayed close to Lily, following her around as she chatted endlessly about her toys, her school, and her favorite cartoons. He didn't talk much, but he didn't seem afraid of her either. Mia took every opportunity to observe him. She noticed the small things, the way he straightened his spoon 3 times before eating, the way he kept glancing toward the door, as if expecting someone to storm in and take him away. The way he never once mentioned his mother. That last detail gnawed at her, Lily, ever oblivious, tugged at Oliver's hand. "Want to see my special hiding place?" Oliver hesitated. Then, for the first time since arriving, his lips curved into the faintest hint of a smile. He nodded. Mia exhaled. She grabbed her phone and stepped into the next room. She had to make a call. She wasn't sure if she was calling the police yet. Maybe she would start small. A missing persons database or child services, someone who could tell her if a little boy named Oliver had been reported missing. But just as she unlocked her screen, a notification popped up. Breaking news. Billionaire businessman Ethan Lancaster offers $1 million reward for missing son. Mia's breath caught in her throat. Billionaire? She clicked the article. A crisp, professional photo of a man in his late 30s stared back at her. Sharp jawline, piercing blue eyes, dark hair neatly styled. He was dressed in an expensive suit, his expression hard and unreadable. Next to him, a smaller image showed Oliver. Same deep blue eyes, same delicate features. Mia's stomach twisted. She scrolled. Ethan Lancaster, CEO of Lancaster Global Enterprises, has issued a public statement following the disappearance of his 6-year-old son, Oliver Lancaster. Authorities are urging anyone with information to come forward immediately. A $1 million reward is being offered for any credible lead to Oliver's whereabouts. Mia's grip tightened on her phone. This was bad. Really bad. Mia wasn't a fool. She knew how this looked. A single mother, alone in a small town, suddenly harboring the missing child of one of the richest men in the country. It didn't matter that she hadn't kidnapped Oliver. The moment someone connected the dots, she'd be accused of exactly that. Her heart pounded. She had to call the police. But then she thought of Oliver's words from earlier. He won't even notice. They don't. Listen. Something inside her rebelled against the idea of handing him over so easily. She glanced toward the living room. She could hear Lily's giggles, Oliver's quieter laughter mixing in. If she called the police now, would they take the time to hear him out, or would they simply return him to a father he had been desperate to escape? Before she could decide, there was a loud knock at the door, a hard, insistent, authoritative knock. Mia's stomach plummeted. She rushed to the door, heart pounding. She barely had time to compose herself before she opened it. 3 police officers stood outside, rain still dripping from their jackets, and standing behind them, face hard as stone, dressed in a sharp black coat, was Ethan Lancaster. The air crackled with tension. Mia's hand tightened on the doorknob. "Miss Carter?" The lead officer, a stocky man with graying hair, adjusted his belt. "We received a tip that a young boy matching the description of a missing child is in this residence." A tip. Mia's blood ran cold. Someone must have seen Oliver. Maybe at the bakery last night, or through the window this morning. In a small town like this, news traveled fast. Her mind raced. She could deny it, buy herself time. But she felt the weight of Ethan Lancaster's gaze, sharp, unforgiving. He already knew. Mia swallowed. "Yes, he's here." Ethan's entire body tensed. He stepped forward, eyes dark with fury. "Where is my son?" There was something in the way he said it that made her heart pound faster. Not with relief, with anger. "I want to see him. Now." Mia's breath hitched. She turned slightly, blocking the doorway. "He's inside, safe, but—" She didn't get to finish. Ethan brushed past the officers and stormed into her house, his powerful presence filling the small space. His expensive shoes clicked against the wooden floor as his gaze swept over the room, searching. And then he saw Oliver. Lily and Oliver had been peeking around the corner, watching the commotion. The moment Oliver locked eyes with Ethan, his entire body went stiff. Ethan's expression darkened. "Oliver!" Oliver shrank back. Mia felt her stomach twist. That wasn't the reaction of a child happy to see his father. That was fear. Ethan stepped closer. "Come here, now." Oliver didn't move. Mia's protective instincts flared. "Wait!" She stepped between them. "You should let him—" Ethan's cold glare snapped to her. "You've had my son for a full day and you didn't call the authorities." His voice was low, dangerous. "What kind of game are you—" Playing? Mia squared her shoulders. I was going to call, but maybe you should be asking why he ran away in the first place. Silence. A muscle in Ethan's jaw ticked. That's none of your concern. Actually, it is. Mia's voice hardened. Because he showed up on my doorstep alone, freezing, terrified. Ethan exhaled sharply, clearly restraining himself. He turned to Oliver, softening his tone slightly. Son, come on. Let's go home. Oliver stayed frozen. Mia had never felt so torn in her life. On one hand, Ethan Lancaster was his father. Her father who had put out a massive search effort, offering $1 million reward. But on the other, Oliver did not want to go, and that meant something. Ethan must have sensed it too, because his gaze flickered, just for a moment, with something other than anger, something like frustration, like guilt. Mia's mind whirled. She wasn't sure what was happening between this father and son. But one thing was clear. This fight was far from over. The silence in Mia Carter's small living room was suffocating. Ethan Lancaster stood like a statue, his expensive black coat still damp from the rain, his cold blue eyes locked on his son. He looked every bit the ruthless billionaire he was rumored to be, controlled, unreadable, and absolutely furious. But Oliver wasn't moving. The little boy stood half-hidden behind Mia, his small fingers gripping the hem of her sweater like she was the only thing keeping him safe. His big blue eyes, so much like his father's, were wide with fear. Oliver, Ethan said again, voice measured. Come here. Oliver's hands tightened, his lip trembled, but he didn't step forward. Mia felt her chest tighten. She knew she had no real right to stand between them. Ethan Lancaster was his father. Legally, he had every right to take Oliver home. But there was something in the way Oliver refused to move, the way his small body trembled, that made Mia's protective instincts flare like wildfire. Something wasn't right. The police officers exchanged uneasy glances. They had come expecting a simple retrieval, a lost child returned to his worried father. But what they were seeing was something entirely different. Mia took a slow breath. She had to tread carefully. She knelt beside Oliver, keeping her voice soft. Sweetheart, do you want to go with your dad? Oliver didn't speak, but he shook his head, and that one small motion sent tension crackling through the air like lightning. Ethan's jaw tightened. His fists clenched at his sides, the only betrayal of his growing frustration. Miss Carter, he said, voice dangerously low, I suggest you step aside. Mia met his icy stare head-on. I suggest you take a moment and ask yourself why. Your own son is afraid to leave with you. For the first time, something flickered in Ethan's eyes. Something other than fury. It was gone in an instant. I don't need parenting advice from a woman who harbored a missing child, he snapped. Mia stiffened. Oliver flinched. That reaction, flinching at his father's words, not just his presence, made Mia's stomach turn. Ethan sighed sharply and pinched the bridge of his nose, as if trying to rein in his temper. When he spoke again, his voice was forced into something smoother. Oliver, we're going home now. Still Oliver didn't move. Mia could feel the police officers shifting uncomfortably. They weren't sure what to do. Legally, they were supposed to return Oliver to his guardian, but no one in this room could deny what they were seeing. A child who did not feel safe. One of the officers, the older one, cleared his throat. Mr. Lancaster, maybe we should give the boy a moment. He's clearly shaken. Ethan turned to him, steel in his expression. A moment. My son has been missing for nearly 24 hours. Yes, sir, but... The officer hesitated, glancing at Oliver. He doesn't seem to want to go with you. Ethan's face darkened. He turned back to Mia, fury simmering just beneath the surface. What the hell did you say to him? Mia's temper flared. She stood, stepping fully between him and Oliver. I didn't have to say anything. Ethan took a sharp breath, nostrils flaring. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I know enough, Mia shot back. I know he was cold, scared, and alone when I found him. I know he was too terrified to let me call the police. And I know he doesn't want to go home with you. Ethan's glare could have turned steel to dust. Do you honestly think I would hurt my own son? Mia didn't answer immediately. She didn't know him. Not really. But Oliver knew him. And Oliver was scared. "That's not for me to say," she finally said, voice firm, "but it is something the authorities should consider before handing him over." Ethan exhaled harshly, frustration radiating off him in waves. He turned to the officers. "Are you really entertaining this insanity? He's my son." The older officer sighed. "And no one is saying otherwise, sir. But given the boy's reaction, we have an obligation to report this to Child Protective Services." Ethan's expression hardened. "You have got to be kidding me." "It's standard protocol when a child expresses fear of their guardian," the officer continued. "It doesn't mean anything yet, but an official needs to assess the situation." Ethan clenched his jaw, his hands balled into fists. But he didn't argue. Mia could see it in his eyes. He knew he had no choice. Oliver wasn't going anywhere with him tonight. 2 hours later, Oliver had fallen asleep on Mia's couch, curled up in one of Lily's spare blankets. The officers had taken their statements. They had confirmed that for now Oliver would be placed in temporary care, a process that, considering Mia was the one who found him, meant he would likely remain with her until an official ruling was made. Ethan had left in a storm of fury, his parting words still ringing in Mia's ears. "This isn't over." No, it wasn't. Mia sat on the armrest of the couch, watching the slow rise and fall of Oliver's small chest as he slept. She had no idea what she had just stepped into. Ethan Lancaster was a powerful man. He wasn't going to sit back and let this happen without a fight. Mia wasn't sure what would happen next, but she did know one thing. She wasn't giving up on Oliver, no matter what it cost her. Mia Carter had spent most of her life minding her own business. She ran a small bakery in a quiet town, raised her daughter the best she could, and never got involved in things that didn't concern her. Now, she was in the center of something she barely understood. Oliver Lancaster, missing child of Billionaire. Ethan Lancaster was asleep on her couch, wrapped in one of Lily's blankets, and his father, he was coming for her. Mia exhaled, rubbing her temples. She had barely slept last night, her mind racing with every possible outcome. CPS had confirmed that Oliver would stay with her temporarily while an assessment was made. Ethan Lancaster, despite his fury, hadn't been able to overrule the system. Not yet, but Mia wasn't naive. Men like Ethan Lancaster didn't lose, and Mia was standing in his way. Morning light streamed through the kitchen window as Mia brewed a pot of coffee. She could hear Lily and Oliver in the next room, Lily's bubbly voice filling the silence, Oliver's quieter responses. He was still so hesitant, so unsure. She needed to understand why. When she carried 2 cups of hot chocolate into the living room, Oliver looked up at her cautiously. She offered him a warm smile. "Thought you might want something sweet to start the day." Oliver hesitated, then took the cup. "Thank you." Mia sat on the couch across from him, watching as he took a careful sip. "Oliver," she said softly, "can we talk for a second?" Oliver stiffened. His fingers tightened around the mug. Mia took a slow breath. "I just want to understand, sweetheart. Why did you run away?" Oliver glanced at Lily, who was busy playing with her dinosaurs on the floor. Then carefully he looked back at Mia. She could see the conflict in his eyes. Slowly he set his cup down. "I didn't run away," he whispered. Mia's heart skipped. "You didn't?" Oliver shook his head. "I just left." Mia frowned. "Can you tell me what happened?" Oliver swallowed. "I woke up and my dad wasn't home again." His little hands balled into fists. "He's never home, not really. He's always busy, always on the phone, always telling me to go play somewhere else. Even when he's there, he's not there." Mia felt a painful twist in her chest. "I thought maybe if I wasn't there, he'd notice." Oliver's voice cracked. "But he didn't." Mia exhaled. "Oh, sweetheart." She wanted to hug him, but she held back. Oliver was clearly used to keeping his emotions locked away. If she pushed too hard, he'd shut down completely. She softened her voice. "Did you mean to come here?" Oliver shook his head. "I just kept walking. I didn't know where I was." "Going?" "And then it started raining and I got scared. I saw the bakery and—" He hesitated. "You looked nice." Mia's throat tightened. She had never felt more certain that Oliver hadn't wandered into her life by accident. Later that afternoon, her front door slammed open, Mia barely had time to react before Ethan Lancaster stormed inside. He was dressed in another one of those perfect suits, though his tie was loose and his expression was pure frustration. Behind him, two well-dressed men, lawyers no doubt, stepped in with much more controlled expressions. Mia crossed her arms. "Good morning to you too." Ethan's sharp blue eyes locked on her. "I want my son." Mia stayed calm. "Oliver is safe. You know that." Ethan's jaw clenched. "You have no idea what you're doing." Mia narrowed her eyes. "Then maybe you should tell me." Ethan stiffened. His lawyers exchanged glances. One of them, a woman with sharp eyes, spoke. "Mr. Lancaster is more than willing to provide any information necessary to clear up this misunderstanding." Mia scoffed. "Is that what we're calling it? A misunderstanding?" Ethan exhaled sharply, running a hand through his hair. "Miss Carter, I don't have time for this. I just want my son." Mia's patience snapped. "Well, maybe if you had time for him before, we wouldn't be here right now." Silence. Ethan's entire body went rigid. Mia had hit a nerve. Slowly he turned to face her fully. His expression was unreadable. "My son is not afraid of me," he said, voice low. "I don't hurt him. I don't mistreat him. He has everything he could ever need." Mia met his gaze. "Except you." Ethan flinched. Mia saw it, and she knew, for the first time, he was actually listening. She softened. "He doesn't want to go home with you, Ethan. Don't you see what that means?" Ethan looked away, his jaw tightening. One of the lawyers cleared his throat. "Mr. Lancaster, perhaps—" "Shut up," Ethan snapped. The room fell silent. Mia watched as he exhaled, rubbing a hand over his face. For the first time, he looked tired. He glanced toward the hallway, where Oliver was peeking out cautiously. Ethan's expression flickered. Anger, frustration, something else. Before he turned back to Mia. "What do you want?" he asked. Mia raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me?" "What do you want?" he repeated, voice quieter. "You're fighting me like... You actually think you have a chance to keep him. So tell me, what do you want?" Mia inhaled. "I want Oliver to be happy," she said simply. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I want him to feel safe," she continued. "I want him to have someone who actually listens to him. I want him to have a father who sees him, not just a responsibility to check off." Ethan's gaze darkened. Mia didn't back down. "What do you want, Ethan?" Silence stretched between them. Then slowly, Ethan's shoulders sagged. For the first time since he had stormed into her house, his expression wasn't cold anger. It was something else, something like doubt. Mia saw the moment he realized, deep down, that she wasn't the enemy, and neither was Oliver. "I want to take care of my son," Ethan finally said. Mia met his gaze. "Then maybe you should start by listening to him." Ethan swallowed hard. He looked back toward Oliver. His son, his quiet, hesitant son, was still watching from the hallway, gripping Lily's stuffed dinosaur like a shield, and for the first time, Ethan really saw him, not as an obligation, not as a problem to solve, but as a little boy who had run away because he wanted to be noticed. Mia saw the change in Ethan's expression, saw the way his anger wavered, saw, for the first time, hope, and she knew. This wasn't the end. It was just the beginning. Ethan Lancaster had never felt powerless in his life. Until now. Standing in Mia Carter's small, homey living room, he was acutely aware of the fact that he, a billionaire, a man who could bend the world to his will with a single phone call, had somehow lost control of the one thing that should have mattered most, his own son. Oliver wasn't standing beside him like he should have been. He was standing behind her. Mia Carter, the single mother who had found him, fed him, and, if Ethan was honest, probably done a better job of making him feel safe than Ethan ever had. Ethan clenched his jaw. "Oliver," he said, keeping his voice calm, "I want you to come home." Oliver hesitated. His small fingers curled around the stuffed dinosaur in his hands. He didn't say no, but he didn't say yes either. Mia, standing beside him, placed a gentle hand on his shoulder, not pulling, not pushing, just there. steady, solid. Ethan felt something twist in his chest. "I'm not angry with you," he continued, keeping his gaze on Oliver. "I just want to talk, that's all." Oliver finally looked up at him. His blue eyes, the same shade as Ethan's, were filled with something Ethan wasn't used to seeing. Hesitation. Promise? Oliver's voice was so small, Ethan barely heard it. Ethan swallowed. The weight of that one word hit him harder than he expected. He nodded. "I promise, sir." Oliver looked up at Mia, almost like he was asking for permission. And that did something to Ethan. His own son felt safer asking a stranger for guidance than his own father. Ethan inhaled sharply. "Can we sit?" Mia studied him for a moment, then nodded. "Of course." They all moved into the living room. Lily, Mia's daughter, sat cross-legged on the floor, watching everything unfold with wide, curious eyes. Oliver sat next to her, still clutching his stuffed dinosaur. Ethan sat across from them, his usual confidence nowhere to be found. He felt like he was standing on unstable ground, and he hated it. Mia sat beside Oliver, her presence calm, reassuring. Ethan noticed how the boy unconsciously leaned toward her. The sight stung more than it should have. Ethan cleared his throat. "Oliver," he started, choosing his words carefully. "Why did you leave?" Oliver shifted, suddenly very interested, in the toy in his lap. I didn't think you'd care." Ethan flinched. "That's not true." Oliver looked up at him, brow furrowed. "But you're always busy. You never have time." The words were like a punch to the gut. Ethan opened his mouth, but nothing came out. Because what could he say? That he'd been working to give Oliver the best life possible, that he had spent years building an empire, so his son would never have to worry about anything, that he had been so focused on making sure Oliver had everything, the best schools, the best home, the best clothes, that he hadn't noticed he didn't have the one thing he actually needed. Him. Ethan let out a slow breath. "You're right." Oliver's eyes widened slightly. Even Mia looked a little surprised. Ethan met his son's gaze. "I haven't been around enough. I've put work first, and that wasn't fair to you." He hesitated. "I didn't know you felt that way, and I'm sorry." Oliver blinked. He looked uncertain, like he didn't quite know how to process those words. Mia watched the interaction closely, but didn't interfere. She was giving them space, letting them figure it out. Ethan ran a hand through his hair. "When I realized you were missing, I was terrified," he admitted. "I thought someone had taken you. I thought—" He exhaled. "I thought I had lost you." Oliver bit his lip. You noticed." Ethan's heart ached. "Of course I noticed." Oliver looked down at his lap again. "You never act like you do." Ethan inhaled slowly. "I know, and I need to fix that." Silence filled the room. Ethan wasn't sure what else to say. He had never been good at this, at talking about feelings, at admitting fault. He was used to solving problems with logic, not emotions. But this wasn't a business deal. This was his son, and he had no idea how to fix what had already been broken. Mia finally spoke. "Oliver has been doing really well here," she said gently. "He's been laughing, playing. He even helped me bake cookies yesterday." Ethan looked at Oliver. "You did?" Oliver gave a tiny nod. Ethan felt another pang of regret. "I didn't know you liked baking." Oliver shrugged. "You never asked." Ethan closed his eyes briefly. God, he had failed this kid. Mia hesitated. "Ethan, I don't think Oliver is saying he doesn't want to go home. I think he's just saying he needs something different from you." Ethan looked at her. Her expression was kind, understanding. She wasn't attacking him. She was helping him see what he had been blind to. He exhaled. "I don't know how to do that." Mia smiled softly. "Then maybe we can figure it out together." Ethan frowned. "Together?" She nodded. "Oliver feels safe here, but he also loves you." She looked at Oliver, then back at Ethan. "Maybe, instead of forcing him back into the life he ran from, you could try being in his life in a way that makes him happy." Ethan stared at her. "You mean, what? Visits? Play dates?" Mia shrugged. "Why not? Take things slow. Show him that you're here, that you care. That you're listening. Ethan hesitated. It was an entirely foreign concept. He wasn't used to easing into things. He was used to making decisions, taking action, fixing problems. But Oliver wasn't a problem to be fixed. He was a little boy who just wanted his dad to see him. Ethan exhaled. Okay, Oliver's head snapped up. Really? Ethan gave him a small smile. Really? Oliver hesitated. Then, to Ethan's complete shock, he scooted a little closer. Not all the way. Not yet. But it was something. Ethan's throat felt tight. So bad baking, huh? Oliver nodded. Ethan smirked. Think you can teach me? Oliver gave him a small, almost shy smile, and for the first time Ethan felt like maybe, just maybe, he was getting something right. Ethan Lancaster was a man used to closing deals, managing billion-dollar companies, and controlling every aspect of his life. But sitting at Mia Carter's tiny kitchen table, trying to roll out cookie dough with his son watching him skeptically, he had never felt more out of his depth. "Dad, you're doing it wrong." Oliver's small voice carried more confidence than Ethan was used to hearing from him. It was strange, but in the past few days, Ethan had started seeing different sides of his son, sides he hadn't even known existed. He looked up from the misshapen ball of dough in front of him. "What do you mean? I thought I was following instructions." Oliver sighed like an exasperated teacher dealing with a particularly hopeless student. "You're squishing it too much. You have to press gently." Ethan frowned, glancing at Mia, who was trying to suppress a smile. "Is that true?" She nodded, amusement dancing in her eyes. "Oliver's the expert here." Ethan huffed but relented, rolling the dough more carefully this time. He stole a glance at Oliver, who was watching his hands closely, making sure he did it right. It was such a small thing, and yet it meant everything. A few days ago, Oliver had barely been able to meet his eyes. Now he was correcting him. Ethan had never cared much about baking, but if rolling out cookie dough was what it took to earn his son's trust, then he'd do it 1,000 times over. The change hadn't happened overnight. It had taken patience. Something Ethan had never been particularly good at. He had stayed in town instead of taking Oliver home immediately, following Mia's suggestion to let him set the pace. Every day he came back to her house, spending time with Oliver in ways he had never done before. It was strange at first. Awkward, but slowly things started shifting. One evening, Ethan took Oliver to the park. He had expected the boy to be hesitant, to shrink away the way he used to. Instead, Oliver had run straight for the swings, his small face lighting up in a way Ethan had never seen before. Ethan had pushed him gently, listening to his laughter, marveling at how easy it was to make his son happy, if only he had tried before. Another night they had read bedtime stories together. Oliver had picked the book, flipping through the pages before settling beside Ethan on the couch. He hadn't snuggled close, not yet, but he had sat there quietly listening as Ethan read. It wasn't much, but it was something. "Dad, you got flour on your face." Oliver's voice pulled Ethan back to the present. He blinked and reached up, wiping at his cheek. "Did I get it?" Oliver giggled. "No. You just made it worse." Mia, laughing, handed him a kitchen towel. "Here, before you end up covered. In dough, too." Ethan rolled his eyes but accepted the towel, wiping his face. He had been spending so much time at Mia's house that it almost felt natural, which was surprising. He had expected to resent her, to see her as an obstacle, a woman who had stood in the way of getting his son back, but instead she had helped him. She had seen what he hadn't. She had protected Oliver not just from potential danger, but from neglect, the kind of neglect that came from a father who had been too wrapped up in his work to notice what his son truly needed, and Ethan would always be grateful for that. Later, that evening after the cookies had been baked and Lily had gone to bed, Ethan found himself sitting across from Mia on the porch, a cup of coffee in his hands. Oliver had fallen asleep in the living room. Curled up under one of Mia's blankets, Ethan hadn't insisted on taking him back to the city yet, not because he couldn't, but because, for the first time, he wasn't sure he should. Mia took a sip of her tea, glancing at him. "You've changed," Ethan smirked. "You say that like I was a monster before." Mia shrugged. "I wouldn't say monster, more like emotionally unavailable." Ethan chuckled. Fair enough. Silence settled between them, comfortable but weighted. Mia was the first to break it. You love him. It wasn't a question. Ethan nodded, exhaling. I always have. I didn't know how to show it. Mia studied him. You're showing it now. Ethan stared at the steam rising from his coffee. I keep thinking about what would have happened if he never ran away, if he never ended up here. Mia tilted her head. And? Ethan swallowed. And I don't think I would have realized what I was doing to him. I thought giving him everything money could buy was enough. I thought I was being a good father just by providing for him. Mia didn't say anything. She let him talk. Ethan exhaled. But I wasn't there for him. Not really. He glanced toward the living room where Oliver was sleeping soundly. I almost lost him before I even understood what I had. Mia's expression softened. But you didn't lose him. Ethan nodded slowly. No, because of you, she smiled slightly. It wasn't just me. Oliver made the choice to stay. He gave you another chance. Ethan glanced at her. You did too. Mia blinked, surprised. What do you mean? Ethan turned his coffee cup in his hands. You could have just called the police the moment you found him. You could have handed him over without a second thought. Mia hesitated. Ethan smirked slightly. But you didn't. You fought for him, even when it meant fighting me. Mia exhaled. I didn't fight you, Ethan. I fought for him. Ethan stared at her for a long moment. He realized, with startling clarity, that he liked her, not just as the woman who had protected his son, not just as the woman who had challenged him when no one else had, but as Mia, strong, fierce. Good. He wasn't sure what that meant yet, but he knew he didn't want to walk away from this, not from Oliver, and not from her. Mia met his gaze. She saw something in his eyes, something softer, something unspoken. She smiled. So what now? Ethan looked toward the living room, where his son was safe and happy, then back at Mia. And he knew this wasn't just a visit. This was the start of something more, something real. And for the first time in a long time, Ethan Lancaster wasn't thinking about business or work. He was thinking about family and what it meant to finally be part of one. Ethan Lancaster had spent his entire life thinking he had everything figured out. His success wasn't accidental. He had built Lancaster Global Enterprises from the ground up, expanding his father's company into a powerhouse of wealth and influence. Every decision he made was calculated, every risk weighed against potential reward. But none of that had prepared him for this. Sitting in Mia Carter's cozy living room, watching his son laugh freely for the first time in years, Ethan realized something. He had been wrong about so many things, and for the first time in his life, he wasn't afraid to admit it. It had been 2 weeks since Oliver had run away. 2 weeks since Ethan had stormed into Mia's house, ready to rip his son away from a woman he had believed to be nothing more than an opportunist. And in those 2 weeks, everything had changed. Oliver was different now, lighter, happier. He still hesitated around Ethan sometimes, still had moments where he withdrew, but there was a warmth in his eyes now that Ethan had never seen before. And Mia had gone from being his greatest frustration to someone he trusted more than he ever thought possible. She was good for Oliver, but more than that, she was good for him, and that terrified him. Because for the first time in his life, Ethan Lancaster wasn't sure if he could afford to lose something, or someone. I can't believe you're actually considering this. Ethan glanced up from his coffee. Across from him, his lawyer, Robert Mills, was staring at him like he had grown a second head. Ethan leaned back in his chair. It makes sense, Robert scoffed. It makes zero sense. You want to uproot your life, move your business operations. Hell, move yourself because of some woman you barely know. Ethan's jaw tightened. It's not because of Mia. It's because of Oliver. Robert studied him. Is it? Ethan exhaled. He had called this meeting with Robert to discuss options, ways to be more present for Oliver without disrupting the empire he had built. But now, sitting here, he realized something. He didn't want options. He wanted a real life, with his son, and that life wasn't back in the city. It was here with Oliver, with Mia, with the family he hadn't even known he needed. Ethan set his coffee down, his decision solidifying. "I'm staying." Robert gaped. "You're serious?" Ethan nodded. "Find a way to make it work." Robert groaned, but there was something almost amused in his expression. Jesus, the great Ethan Lancaster choosing a small-town life? Ethan smirked. Miracles happen. Later that night, Ethan found himself standing outside Mia's bakery. He had spent hours going over the decision in his head, playing out every possible consequence. But at the end of the day, it all came down to one thing. This was where he was meant to be. The bell above the door chimed as he stepped inside. The place smelled like warm vanilla and cinnamon, a scent he was beginning to associate with home. Mia looked up from behind the counter, surprised to see him. "Ethan," he exhaled, "we need to talk." She hesitated, then wiped her hands on her apron. "Okay." Ethan glanced around the bakery. It was late, the shop empty. He leaned against the counter, watching her carefully. "I'm staying," he said. Mia blinked. "What?" "I'm staying here," he repeated. "I'm moving my operations, restructuring things so I can be based here, so I can be with Oliver." Mia's lips parted in surprise. "Ethan, that's huge." He nodded. "I know." She searched his face. "Are you sure?" Ethan smirked. "For the first time in a long time, yeah, I am." Mia inhaled, clearly processing. Then slowly, she smiled, and damn if that smile didn't make his heart stumble. "I think Oliver is going to be really happy," she said softly. Ethan felt something settle inside him. Peace. "I hope so," he murmured. They stood there for a moment, the air between them shifting. Something unspoken passed between them, something neither of them had quite put into words yet, but it was there, and Ethan knew it was only a matter of time before they both acknowledged it. The next morning, Ethan found Oliver sitting on the porch staring at the sky. He walked over and sat beside him. "Hey, buddy." Oliver looked up. "Hi." Ethan hesitated, then spoke. "I wanted to tell you something." Oliver tilted his head, curious. "I'm not going back to the city." Ethan said carefully, "I'm staying here with you." Oliver's eyes widened. "Really?" Ethan nodded. "Really?" For a long moment, Oliver just stared at him. Then, slowly, hesitantly, he scooted closer. Not much, but enough. Enough for Ethan to know he had made the right choice. Oliver was his priority now, and nothing was going to change that. The following weeks passed in a blur of change. Ethan officially relocated his operations, setting up a small office in town. He hated how slow things moved outside of the corporate world, but for Oliver, he was willing to adjust. Mia helped him find a place nearby, something smaller than his usual mansions, but cozy. And slowly, a new routine formed. Ethan would pick Oliver up from school. They would bake together at Mia's, they would eat dinner together. It was so simple, but to Ethan, it felt like everything. One evening after dinner, Oliver climbed into Ethan's lap. It was so unexpected, so natural, that Ethan almost didn't react. He just wrapped his arms around his son and held him close. It was the first time Oliver had reached for him like that, and in that moment, Ethan knew, without a doubt, he had finally earned his son's trust. It had taken time. It had taken effort, but for the first time in his life, Ethan Lancaster was exactly where he was supposed to be. And as he glanced at Mia, who was watching them with a soft smile, he realized something else. This wasn't just about Oliver anymore. This was about them, and Ethan, he was finally ready to take that next step, to build something real, something permanent, something called home. And that's the story of how a single mom, a lost boy, and a billionaire father found their way to becoming a family. At its heart, this story is about love, second chances, and the power of truly listening to those we care about. Sometimes the things we chase, money, success, security, blind us to what really matters. But in the end, family isn't just about blood. It's about the people who show up, who stay, and who love us unconditionally. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss more heartwarming content like this. It really helps the channel grow and reach more amazing viewers like you. Now, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Drop a comment below and let's chat. What was your favorite moment in the story? Do you think Ethan and Mia should end up together, or should they just co-parent? What would you do if you found a lost child who was afraid to go home? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.